Hello everyone. This is a dark and horrifying tale. One of the most infamous cases in all of China, steeped in an indescribable terror. At the heart of this story is a ruthless monster, a cannibalistic demon. But what makes this figure truly terrifying isn't just his murderous nature, it's the chronic or agonizing headaches that plagued him. For years, he endured unbearable pain with no cure in sight, until he stumbled upon a grotesque folk remedy consuming human brains could heal all ailments. From that moment, a true nightmare began. The grim fate of 12 souls was sealed forever in this horror. What sent shivers down the spines of those following the case was the identity of the victims, not just strangers, but neighbors, loved ones, and familiar faces he passed daily on the streets of his hometown. It all started with a single phone call to the police station in Harbin, Heilongjiang province. In 1993, the case was so severe that officers rushed to the scene to investigate. The victim was an elderly scavenger, and following the caller's tip, police discovered parts of the man's body stuffed inside a black woven sack. Examination revealed the remains weren't preserved in chemicals, and the cuts were sloppy, ruling out the possibility of a medical dissection. This was no accident. It was a brutal murder and dismemberment, a crime of chilling magnitude. The Harbin police immediately formed a special task force to tackle the case. The first step was to locate the remaining parts of the victim's body. Hundreds of officers scoured nearby areas, and their efforts quickly paid off. They found another woven sack not far from the initial crime scene, containing the torso of a man. But just as the police thought they could move forward, the coroner's words stopped them cold. The head and torso didn't belong to the same person. The skin tones and stages of decomposition were starkly different. In other words, at least 2 men had been savagely killed and dismembered. Based on the cuts at the neck and the type of woven sack, the police were confident the same killer was responsible for both murders. The remaining body parts were likely scattered in nearby dumps or the city's communal waste sites. The task force sealed off all local landfills and trash bins, launching a massive search with hundreds of volunteers to comb through the refuse for the missing remains. After a grueling week, they uncovered more body parts. But what no one could have anticipated was this when the pieces were assembled. They belonged to 5 different people, 2 men, 2 women, and a 13-year-old girl. 4 of the adults had been stabbed through the skull with a sharp object, their brain tissue missing. The young girl had been strangled to death. Further examination revealed the 5 victims had died at different times. The man and woman, both around 30, had been killed 2 months prior, while the other 3 had died about a month ago. During a case briefing, one officer's memory was jogged. A month earlier, the station had received a missing persons report about a family of 3. The caller said his older brother and sister-in-law had vanished. The brother, named Jian Li, was 42 and owned a photography studio. One day, the studio was found eerily empty, with no one managing it. His sister-in-law hadn't shown up to work in a week, and their daughter was nowhere to be found. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Jian Li's younger brother had alerted the police. The police searched Jian Li's home, hoping to uncover clues, but found nothing suspicious. No signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, not even missing valuables. With no direct evidence to justify a criminal investigation, they had no choice but to classify the case as a missing persons report, filed away with countless others. But now, as they investigated this new, gruesome case, the similarities in location and timing between the 2 incidents caught their attention. The special task force reached out to Jian Li's younger brother, asking him to come to the station for identification. The results were chilling. 3 of the 5 victims were indeed Jian Li's family, not just murdered but dismembered and discarded in the city's trash heaps. This was no ordinary robbery homicide. The meticulous handling of the bodies suggested a deep-seated grudge against the victims. Following this lead, the police shifted their focus to individuals who might have had conflicts with Jian Li. According to his brother, Jian Li had no bitter enemies. A former wrestling champion who'd won a gold medal, Jian Li had a rebellious streak in his youth, often getting into fights and even assaulting others. So the possibility of an old grudge wasn't entirely out of the question. Still, any disputes seemed too minor to be called true vendettas. Nevertheless, adhering to their principle of leaving no stone unturned, the police tracked down those who'd clashed with Jian Li in the past. As expected, none harbored deep resentment, and even if they'd wanted revenge, they wouldn't have resorted to such extreme measures. Each had solid alibis, and the police quickly ruled them out as suspects. With the identities of the other 2 victims still unknown, the investigation hit a dead end. Under the guidance of the Special Task Force, forensic experts conducted a second autopsy and uncovered disturbing anomalies. The skulls of Jian Li's family had been shattered with a heavy object, like a hammer or axe, causing fatal fractures and spilling brain matter. The other 2 victims' skulls, however, were riddled with puncture wounds, as if the killer had repeatedly hacked at their heads with a sharp tool, possibly an axe. In typical dismemberment cases, killers might sever and discard heads, but going to the lengths of cracking open skulls and removing brains was unusual, laborious, and time-consuming. Seasoned forensic experts began to recall a case from over a decade ago in northeast China. A militia soldier, plagued by a chronic illness, had heard a rumor that eating the brains of living people could cure him. He killed and cannibalized his victims. Though the story sounded far-fetched, the police couldn't dismiss the possibility that the killer they were now hunting shared a similar motive. The killer's methods were so brutal and calculated that the police suspected this wasn't his first crime. They shifted their approach, mobilizing over 200 officers to conduct a sweeping search of another city landfill. 10 days later, their efforts yielded a grim discovery: 5 more bodies. These victims' remains were different from the previous 5 burned, with their faces severely disfigured. Yet, all 10 victims shared a haunting trait after being killed. Their skulls had been split open, and their brains removed. With such horrifying details, the Ministry of Public Security issued an urgent directive, ordering local police to resolve the case as quickly as possible. However, the investigative techniques of the time were limited, and aside from Jian Li's family, the identities of the remaining 7 victims couldn't be confirmed. 5 of the 10 bodies had been burned, their faces too disfigured to reconstruct. Months passed, but the investigation stalled, yielding no new leads. Then, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a villager who provided a critical tip that would crack the case wide open. He recounted how his young son, playing near the village entrance, had spotted a local man named Kai Hu riding a tricycle with a black tarp covering something in the back. Curious, the boy followed the vehicle. As it hit a large pothole at the village entrance, the tricycle jolted, and an object fell off, rolling into the roadside bushes. Kai Ho, unaware, kept driving. The boy ran to investigate and found, to his confusion, what he thought was a pig's leg or sheep's hoof. He brought it home to show his father, who was horrified to realize it was a human arm. Terrified, the father immediately contacted the police. Acting swiftly, the police descended on Kai Ho's home, searching every inch of his property. In his firewood shed, they uncovered a blood-stained axe, a knife, and fragments of human remains. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Kai Ho could no longer deny his crimes and confess to his atrocities. In less than a year, he admitted to killing 12 people and consuming the brains of 7, including, shockingly, his wife of barely 4 months and her child from a previous relationship. Who was Kai Ho, and what drove him to such depravity? He revealed that before his killing spree, he'd been arrested twice for theft. Instead of returning all the stolen money, he hid a portion with a friend. After his release, he used those funds to open a barbecue restaurant, which provided him a comfortable living. But his newfound stability was short-lived. He soon developed chronic, debilitating headaches. Desperate for relief, he visited 7 or 8 major hospitals, undergoing countless tests and trying numerous medications, all to no avail. The pain only worsened. In his agony, Kai-Hu recalled a childhood tale that eating human brains could cure any ailment. Unsure if it would work, but convinced he couldn't survive the pain much longer, he decided to test the gruesome theory. Thus began his horrific self-prescribed treatment. Under the pretense of hiring staff for his restaurant, Kai-Ho lured victims with enticing job offers. He hired one man, whom he asked to demonstrate his cooking skills in the kitchen. While the man was preoccupied, Kai-Ho grabbed a prepared axe, struck him fatally in the head, and used the same tool to crack open his skull, extracting and consuming the brain. Afterward, he dragged the body to a special kitchen area for disposal. Using the axe and a knife, he dismembered the corpse into 6 pieces. To avoid identification, he doused the remains with oil, partially burned them, then stuffed the pieces into woven sacks and dumped them in a landfill. According to Kai-Hu, after eating the brain, he felt significantly better, which spurred him to continue. Using the same method, he killed 4 more employees in quick succession. Fearing that too many murders would draw police attention, he planned to pause his spree. But then, a friend named Lin visited with his girlfriend. Lin was the one who'd safeguarded Kai-Ho's stolen money years earlier. The 3 drank together, and as the alcohol flowed, Kai-Ho's headaches flared up. When Lin stepped out to take a phone call, Kai-Ho made advances on Lin's girlfriend. She wasn't one to be trifled with. She swiftly kicked him in the groin, leaving him writhing in pain and unable to move. As Kai-Ho regained his senses, rage surged through him. He grabbed a chair and smashed it over the girl's head, causing severe hemorrhaging. Not stopping there, he seized his axe and struck her skull as she lay dying. Only when he realized she was dead did he snap out of his drunken haze. Struck by the gravity of what he'd done and unsure how to face Lin, after wrestling with his thoughts, he decided to eliminate any witnesses. He dragged her body under the bed, then hid the axe in a corner, preparing for his next move. Soon, Lin returned from his phone call. Kai-Ho lied, claiming Lin's girlfriend had gone to the bathroom. As longtime friends, Lin trusted him without a hint of suspicion. The 2 sat down and resumed drinking. Minutes later, Kai-Ho stood, retrieved the axe, and circled behind Lin. With a powerful swing, he buried the blade in Lin's head, killing him instantly. Afterward, Kai-Ho consumed the brains of both victims and dismembered their bodies. Perhaps due to some psychological effect, after eating the brains of his close friend and his girlfriend, Kai-Ho's headaches vanished, leaving him with no further reason to kill. Yet, by this point, murder had become an integral part of his life, a compulsion he couldn't shake. One day, he spotted a provocatively dressed woman in a park and decided she was a suitable target. He approached, attempting to charm her, but as he made his move, she screamed, drawing the attention of a passerby none other than Jian Li. A man of principle, Jian Li couldn't ignore the injustice. He charged at Kai-Ho, and a fierce brawl ensued. It was no contest. Jian Li, a champion wrestler, easily overpowered Kai-Ho, beating him black and blue until he was forced to kneel and beg for mercy. Humiliated by the thrashing, Kai-Ho harbored a burning desire for revenge. He knew a direct confrontation with Jian Li's wrestling prowess was futile, so he devised a cunning plan. One day, he visited Jian Li's photography studio, spinning a tale about the park incident. He claimed the woman was his ex-girlfriend, and their argument stemmed from old grudges. Kai-Ho then lavished praise on Jian Li, admiring his bravery and fighting skills, saying he respected his sense of justice. Finally, he proposed they become friends and invited Jian Li to his barbecue restaurant for drinks. Though Jian Li had a fiery temper, he was an honest, straightforward man who didn't hold grudges. He accepted the invitation from his new friend. After hours of drinking and bonding, the two began to treat each other like brothers. A few days later, Kai-Ho invited Jian Li back to his restaurant, this time with everything prepared to end his life. But he hesitated when Jian Li mentioned he'd told his wife about their plans to meet that day. Kai-Ho feared the wife would suspect him if Jian Li went missing. After some deliberation, he decided to proceed. He killed Jian Li, then changed clothes and headed to the photography studio to eliminate Jian Li's wife. By chance, their daughter was there too. Though caught off guard, Kai Ho quickly adjusted his plan, deciding to kill the wife first, then the daughter. How did Kai Ho murder the mother and child? Kai Ho began his plan with a lie, telling Jian Li's wife that her husband was at his barbecue restaurant. So drunk he was bleeding from the nose. Panicked, she rushed to the restaurant to check on him. Kai Ho had assumed she'd bring her daughter along, but she left the young girl at home. This didn't deter his murderous intent. He killed Jian Li's wife at the restaurant, then returned to the photography studio. With little effort, he overpowered and killed the defenseless girl. In his confession, Kai Ho also admitted to murdering a street worker. He approached her, hurling insults and degrading her for her profession, which he found repulsive. In a fit of rage, he kicked her into a river, where she drowned. Her body was never recovered, so the police charged Kai Ho with 11 counts of murder. The monstrous killer was ultimately sentenced to death. Though he faced execution, no punishment could undo the atrocities he committed or heal the wounds of his victims' families. Kai Ho was no human, he was a demon. Justice was served, and the families of the victims found some solace in knowing the murderer faced a fitting penalty. Yet, the immense pain of their loss would linger, a scar they'd carry for life. Understanding Kai Ho's psyche and motives reveals the critical role of awareness. Had he been rational enough to recognize the inhumanity of the so-called remedy and the devastating consequences of his actions, 12 lives might have been spared.
Japan is widely known as one of the countries with the lowest crime rates in the world, but that doesn't mean it's completely peaceful. If the West has the mafia, then Japan has the Yakuza. In Japan, when talking about the underworld, it's impossible not to mention the Yakuza, infamous criminal organizations that have existed for hundreds of years. They're not just outlaws, but highly organized underground forces that operate openly within society. From gambling, smuggling, and extortion to economic and political manipulation, the Yakuza have infiltrated every corner of the land of the rising sun. Despite the government's strict crackdowns, these gangs continue to exist, both terrifying and mysterious, like an inseparable part of Japan that no one can completely erase. In September 2020, Japan was shaken by the death sentence of Nomura Satoru, the fourth-generation leader of the Kudo-kai gang, infamously known as the Living King of Hell. He had previously thrown a Molotov cocktail at the home of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Even during his trial, he brazenly threatened the judge, saying, "I will make you regret this for the rest of your life." Under Nomura Satoru's leadership, Kudo-kai grew stronger and even allied with other gangs to challenge Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's most powerful and long-standing Yakuza organization. Japan is the only country in the world that legally acknowledges the existence of Yakuza groups, and Kudo-kai is the largest criminal organization in Kyushu. Its influence extends not only in Fukuoka, but also reaches Tokyo, Chiba, and many other regions. A shocking incident. Looking at Nomura Satoru's past actions, each of his crimes was unbelievably ruthless. One of the most horrifying incidents occurred in June 2014 when Japanese media reported a brutal attack on a nurse working at a cosmetic surgery hospital. On her way home, she was viciously stabbed dozens of times in the neck, head, and body in an act of sheer brutality. After an extensive investigation, police concluded that the attack was linked to Kudo-kai. When this information was revealed, the international public was outraged. But why would such a notorious criminal organization target an ordinary nurse so cruelly? As it turned out, the incident was directly tied to Nomura Satoru himself. In 2014, at over 70 years old, Nomura began feeling dissatisfied with the size of his genitals. So, he decided to undergo a secretive surgical procedure at a hospital. As the leader of Kudo-kai, he didn't want this information to be leaked, so he only allowed a private doctor to examine him before the operation. Before the surgery, the nurses had no idea who he was. When they noticed his body covered in tattoos, one nurse jokingly said, "With so many tattoos, you must not be afraid of pain, especially if you're brave enough to have surgery down there." Hearing this, Nomura instantly flew into a rage. He believed he was being mocked, that the nurse had insulted his manhood. Furious, he jumped off the operating table, roared in anger, and refused to proceed with the surgery. The nurse and the hospital director repeatedly apologized, desperately trying to calm him down. It was only when the lead surgeon intervened that Nomura finally agreed to return to the table and complete the operation. Even though the surgery was successful, Nomura was not satisfied. He wasn't happy with the results, but what haunted him most was the nurse's remark. He convinced himself that her joke had psychologically affected him, ruining his recovery process. His irritation only grew when he experienced an allergic reaction and an infection post-surgery. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. For a man like Nomura, such humiliation could not be ignored. 6 months later, Nomura issued an order to track down the nurse who had joked about him. Hundreds of his subordinates worked tirelessly to find her, eventually uncovering her daily routine. One night, as she was walking home, a man dressed in black suddenly appeared and blocked her path. Before she could react, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her repeatedly in the neck, head, and body. Blood splattered across the narrow alley, and she collapsed without a chance to scream for help. She could never have imagined that a harmless joke, meant to ease a patient's nerves, would nearly cost her life at the hands of one of Japan's most feared criminals. Luckily, a passerby discovered her in critical condition and immediately called an ambulance. Thanks to this timely intervention, she survived. But what was even more terrifying was what happened after the attack. Nomura Satoru himself visited the hospital where she was recovering. Standing before her hospital bed, he coldly smirked and said, "I didn't expect you to survive. Next time, be careful with what you say." His words were chilling, as if he had nothing to do with the brutal attack. Looking at this man, no one could have imagined that just months earlier, he had nearly lost his temper on the operating table over a mere joke. But this was just one of the many horrifying incidents that made Nomura Satoru infamous. Nomura was born into a wealthy family in Kitakyushu. His father was a powerful landowner. As Japan's economy recovered, his family bought large amounts of land, renting it out to factories and businesses, generating massive profits without ever needing to work. As the youngest of 6 siblings, Nomura was spoiled to the extreme, shaping him into an arrogant, reckless individual. As a child, he often stole toys from his friends and bullied children from poor families. When he reached school age, his father hoped he would have at least some ambition. Despite knowing his son's stubborn and defiant nature, he used his wealth and influence to enroll Nomura in an elite school, where only the children of aristocrats and wealthy families studied. He hoped this environment would change his son, or at the very least, teach him the manners of someone from a high-status family. But Nomura was never interested in studying. He frequently got into fights, formed gangs, and only enjoyed the feeling of being in control. One day, in an attempt to show his power to his friends, Nomura led a group of boys out of school to a bustling shopping district. They decided to steal electronics from a store. However, just as they were celebrating their stolen loot, they were caught by the shop owner and handed over to the police. The incident quickly reached the school administration. In an elite school with a long-standing reputation, having a student commit a crime was unacceptable. However, due to the Nomura family's influence, the school didn't expel him outright. Instead, they quietly suggested to his parents that it would be best for Nomura to leave the school voluntarily. When Nomura heard this news, he agreed instantly without a second thought. He had long been fed up with school. His family didn't object either, as they had always spoiled him unconditionally. To them, as long as they had money, their son could live comfortably for life even without an education. After dropping out, Nomura didn't sit idle. He rounded up a group of friends and dove headfirst into a life of debauchery, gambling, drinking, and chasing women. Through mingling with this rowdy crowd, he was introduced to gambling. Remarkably, Nomura had a natural talent for it. Every time he stepped into a casino, he walked away with a decent haul. One night, luck struck him like lightning. He hit it big, raking in 2 billion yen in a single night at the casino, smashing all previous records. But winning too much isn't always a blessing, especially when the casino was under the thumb of Kudo Kai, one of Japan's most feared Yakuza organizations. His success quickly landed him in the sights of Kimura Kiyosu, Kudo Kai's strategist, known as the tactical genius of the gang. Kimura Kiyosu didn't buy into luck. He wanted to see for himself whether this kid had real skill or was just a one-time fluke. So, he challenged Nomura to a one-on-one showdown at the casino. Showing no mercy, Kimura struck hard and crushed Nomura decisively. When Nomura left the table, he had lost every yen he'd won and even owed Kimura an enormous debt. But instead of panicking or fleeing like most would, Nomura stayed eerily calm. He went home, nonchalantly asked his parents for money to pay off the debt, then returned to challenge Kimura Kiyosu again. His recklessness and arrogance left Kimura Kiyosu deeply impressed. A kid bold enough to face off against the Yakuza, fearless of heaven or earth, with a sharp mind and guts to match. This was a rare gem for the underworld. So, instead of continuing the gambling duel, Kimura Kiyosu made a different offer: join Kudo Kai. Without a hint of hesitation, Nomura agreed. He had already grasped the power of the Yakuza in Japan. If he could climb to the top, thousands would follow his orders. His dream of becoming a boss finally had a shot at coming true. In 1978, backed by Kimura Kiyosu's recommendation and armed with his family's vast wealth, Nomura joined Tanakagumi, the largest branch of Kudo Kai. At first, he was just a low-ranking thug, but to rise quickly, he didn't hesitate to bribe his superiors while aggressively building connections within the organization. However, in the Yakuza world, money and connections alone weren't enough. Ruthlessness was key. Tanakagumi's current leader, Sitaro, was a notorious cold-blooded killer. He took lives without blinking, using brutality to maintain his grip on power. If Nomura wanted to climb higher, he had to prove he was fearsome enough to replace Sitaro. The opportunity came when a rival gang let its guard down. Nomura quietly rallied his crew and launched a lightning-fast attack, personally killing the rival leader. After this, his reputation spread like wildfire, and everyone in Kudo Kai knew his name. That same year, Nomura's mother passed away from a severe illness, leaving him an inheritance of 7 billion yen. He immediately poured this fortune into the gang, opening his own casinos for profit. At the same time, he set his sights on the construction industry in Kyushu. Every construction company signing a contract had to pay Kudo Kai a 5% protection fee. Refusal meant smashed equipment and torched projects. With his ferocity and ruthless tactics, Nomura swiftly became a dominant figure in Tanakagumi. His underlings unanimously called him Big Brother, feeding his growing intoxication with power. Through sheer brutality and decisiveness, Nomura struck fear into the entire Kyushu region, earning him the nickname Living King of Hell. But for a man like him, what he had was still not enough. In 1980, Sitaro, Tanakagumi's leader, was assassinated during a gang turf war. When Sitaro fell, Nomura seized the moment to rise. He eliminated rivals and won his crew's loyalty by turning the gang's shared casino into a private operation, letting his men pocket their own profits. This move lined everyone's pockets, earning him their gratitude. Before the leadership vote even took place, Nomura effortlessly succeeded Sitaro, taking the reins of Tanakagumi. At this point, his status in Kudo Kai was second only to the chairman. But this wasn't Nomura's endgame. He believed power had to be absolute, with no half measures. To claim the chairman's seat, he imposed new rules on businesses under Kudo Kai's control in Kyushu and Fukuoka. Beyond protection fees, they now had to cough up a percentage of their revenue. Leveraging his family's real estate connections, he also helped the gang's top boss secure prime land for investments. Over time, Nomura's abilities gained widespread recognition within the organization. Just 2 years after taking over Tanakagumi, he was promoted again, officially becoming the fourth-generation chairman of Kudo Kai in 1982. From 1982 to 2019, as Kudo Kai's chairman, Nomura committed countless heinous crimes. He crafted bombs for assassinations, attacked shop owners who refused to cooperate, ordered hits on police and anti-crime politicians, and targeted judicial officials and high-ranking corporate executives. To get his way, he didn't shy away from guns, Molotov cocktails, or even blowing up the homes of energy company leaders. He even had the audacity to hurl firebombs at former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's residence and office. Under his rule, Kudokai operated like a full-blown terrorist organization. Nomura behaved like a feudal warlord, unleashing violence on anyone who displeased him. What's truly terrifying is how arbitrary his reasons often were. In 2011, he ordered his men to lob a grenade into a bar simply because he found its sign ugly. The blast gravely injured 12 innocent women, while the attacker killed himself on the spot to shield Nomura. His followers were like fanatical warriors, ready to die for their master. Nomura's crimes didn't stop there. In early 2014, when a major fisheries corporation arrived in Kyushu to invest, he personally led his crew to the fishing village's gates, demanding protection fees. The local fishermen, terrified of dealing with gangsters, were too scared to go out to sea. Faced with this situation, the head of the local fisheries association had no choice but to meet Nomura and negotiate, pleading with him to stop intimidating the villagers. Unexpectedly, Nomura saw this as an insult. He ordered a grenade attack on the fish market, killing 12 people. He then commanded the assassination of the Fisheries Association leader, leaving the entire village too terrified to resist and forcing them to obediently pay up. The incident spurred local authorities to hunt him down. Police set up multiple ambushes at the casinos and bars he frequented, but each attempt failed. This enraged Nomura, prompting him to retaliate. He ordered the killings of 2 police officers as a warning to the authorities. To Nomura, murder was a game. Anyone who stood in his way had to die. But the absurdity didn't end there. After killing the Fisheries Association leader, Nomura went on to murder another person for a ridiculous reason. During a dental visit, when the dentist asked him to open his mouth, Nomura took it as an affront to his authority. He ordered his men to eliminate the dentist, who, ironically, turned out to be the nephew of the Fisheries Association leader. Upon learning this, Nomura merely let out a cold chuckle, saying the whole family deserved to die. That same year, the nurse assassination attempt we discussed earlier took place. After waking up, the nurse recalled encountering Nomura during his hospital surgery. She immediately accused him of ordering her attack as revenge. Nomura swiftly pinned the blame on one of his underlings, providing the man with enough money and securing his family's future in exchange for taking the fall. Once the dust settled, Nomura brazenly visited the cosmetic hospital, taunting the nurse. "Feeling better? I'd like you to personally take care of me." His arrogance infuriated everyone, but his power left them helpless. Even the police were powerless, fueling his growing recklessness and descent into crime. Nomura didn't just want to dominate the underworld. He had ambitions to meddle in politics. In 2019, during a parliamentary election, angered by Abe Shinzo's policies, he threw a Molotov cocktail at the former prime minister's home, setting himself on a path to ruin. This act of violence immediately landed him on the Japanese government's priority crackdown list. But Nomura wasn't your average criminal. He had powerful backers. He was closely tied to former Japanese Environment Minister Matsumoto Ryu, his brother-in-law, through their marriages to 2 sisters, forging a tight bond between politics and the underworld. With this connection, Nomura feared no one. Plus, his crimes were always carried out by his minions, keeping his hands clean of blood. This became the key to his repeated escapes from justice. However, soon after, the deteriorating security situation in Kyushu caught the Japanese government's attention. Beyond safety concerns, Japan was preparing for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. To showcase a safe and civilized nation, dangerous figures like Nomura had to be targeted. Japan declared that Nomura's influence was harming international relations, forcing decisive action. With U.S. military bases in Kyushu, his actions also threatened American interests, prompting the U.S. government to step in. The U.S. froze all of Nomura's international bank accounts and imposed a travel ban. During this period, Japan teamed up with the U.S., deploying 3,800 police officers to apprehend him. Despite the massive manhunt, Nomura showed no fear, confident that Matsumoto Ryu wouldn't abandon him. One day, as he was getting ready to step out in his tracksuit, police ambushed him and took him into custody. He didn't resist, calmly letting them handcuff him and escort him to the station. With their boss captured, Kudokai fell into disarray like a snake without its head. Rival gangs quickly swooped in to carve up its territory. During his detention, Nomura faced 62 interrogations but denied every charge. Even in court, he maintained his defiant attitude, threatening the judge mid-trial. "I'll make you regret this for the rest of your life." On August 24th, 2021, the Fukuoka District Court sentenced Nomura to death for orchestrating 4 civilian attacks, convicting him of murder and organized conspiracy to kill. He became the first Yakuza boss in Japanese history to receive the death penalty. Shortly after, Kudokai appointed its 5th-generation chairman and continued operations in Kyushu. Nomura's death sentence marked the first time Japan took such a hardline stance against a Yakuza boss, signaling that the government might tighten its grip on criminal organizations in the future. And that wraps up the story of Nomura Satoru, the 4th-generation leader of Kudokai, known as the Living King of Hell. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.